to full-time community service and building movements for positive change, both in the United States and around the globe. Kahn published Wise Up in collaboration with 72 authors to create a counter momentum to the rise in hateful rhetoric and violent extremism. Daisy, we're delighted you could join us this morning. On behalf of Esther and myself, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me and for this wonderful conversation today. And welcome to the audience. I don't know where you're from and what parts of the world you're joining from, but I'm from the New York area. And just a little bit about myself, I actually, for the first 25 years of my life, I was an architectural designer. And the event of 9/11 really propelled me into community building and peace building, partly because of what I witnessed. And I witnessed an attack in my neighborhood, because I used to work in Lower Manhattan, on my city, on my country. And this attack was perpetuated by a people that professed to be part of my faith. So it became deeply personal, and I didn't have any mechanisms for how to solve the problem. But I knew, having grown up in Kashmir and having the kind of multi-religious background that had shaped my life, that the best way to do that was really to bring people of all religions together. People of conscience, people who didn't want to see conflict, and especially conflict in the name of religion. So I used my personal skills at collaborating across the aisles, and I began to reach out to people of other faiths, Jewish people, Christian people, people of really all faiths, because as you know, New York is the Mecca of all religions. So it wasn't that difficult to get a coalition going. And I'm saying all this as a lesson that I have learned, because in this collaboration that we began doing way back then, just to create dialogue so that we could understand each other. So it was really stemming from that at that point, was how do we dialogue with one another? How do we understand one another? And it really began with the Jewish community across a dining table, literally. They had their list of questions that they wanted to ask us Muslims. And we didn't have too many questions for them, but they had a lot of questions for us. And it was just sitting across the dinner table and having these conversations that ultimately resulted in coalition building. And today I sit on the board of an organization called Jewish Muslim Advisory Council because of that, those deep relationships that have been formed over the years. And we together are fighting against, for hate crime legislation. So this is why I'm saying this, is because those of you who are here today are probably looking for practical ways to do something. What can we do? So each person, just one person, can start a dialogue across the aisle and say, let's reach out. And so this is part of my work that I do. And so I was asked by Esther and the rest of you to share a little bit about what the organization does. So then I founded WISE. I quit my corporate career, founded WISE, and began to really focus on Muslim women. So not only was I personally impacted, with what happened with 9/11 in the name of my religion, I decided to do something about that. But then I also was directly confronted by this issue of Muslim women not getting their rights or being denied their God-given rights. And I knew, as a Muslim woman who came from a practicing Muslim home, I knew the rights that we had been given that were guaranteed to us in the 7th century. But why were these rights being denied to women all over the world? This became pretty much the basis of my mandate that was thrust upon me as an empowered Muslim woman living in the most powerful country in the world. I felt that it was really important for me to step up and do something about it. So that also became an area of my focus. And this is literally, we created this organization so that Muslim women leaders who I knew were instrumental in creating peace at the local levels in their community, could actually lead their community in creating a prosperous world that was anchored in gender equality and human dignity, because we have this is the basis of our faith. Gender equality is embedded in Islam, and human dignity is also embedded in the theology of Islam, because the Quran says, God has conferred dignity onto the children of Adam, and children of Adam does not distinguish between any one religion. So I knew that with those values behind us, we could actually propel ourselves. So we promote women leaders all over the world who are on the front lines of their communities, whether they're in Afghanistan or they're in Gambia or they're in Egypt, whatever part of the world that they are in, we promote them. We offer creative solutions to persistent social issues by amplifying their voices and at all levels. I don't want women to only speak about women's issues, and that's why my presentation is not only going to be about women. I am a woman. I'm very concerned about women's rights, but I'm a woman who also wants to shape society, want to shape the discourse in society, whether it's political, religious, or social. So when we collaborate across stakeholders, both genders, I believe that men are extremely important, especially influential men in our communities, can really shape the discourse around women or shape the discourse even when it comes to violence. And this is my own personal experience working with faith leaders, especially in countries like Afghanistan, where we have been able to make seismic shifts because we've engaged with people of other genders. And we do this by creating solidarity among women, and we bring women leaders together at conferences so we can maximize our individual power and also collective strength. And we do this by using the force of knowledge. This is kind of what defines us a little bit differently than others, because we really delve very deeply into our scriptures and we publish position papers on any issue that affects women or any issue that affects society. So we issued a paper called Jihad Against Violence, because that was the thing that was plaguing us post 9/11, and a lot of the women that I had assembled through a council that I created, Muslim Women's Shura Council, said, well, why are we only focusing on women's issues? And one woman turned around and said, the biggest issue that's affecting us all is terrorism. It's tearing our societies apart. So we decided to do a paper called Jihad Against Violence. Jihad literally means struggle or, pushing back. And that paper was published in 2009. And I remember it was published at a conference, and we were so excited. We had invited everybody, the BBC, CNN, everyone was supposed to be there. And then there was a terrorist attack in Indonesia, and the entire press corps left us by ourselves. And here we were, we had a solution, and they left and they went to cover the actual event. So it never really, the position paper never really got out into the press. So nobody knew we had done it, but it had a huge impact in a country like Afghanistan, because our network of women took it upon themselves to start educating people. So much so that today in Afghanistan, we have trained 6,000 imams, train the trainer kind of thing. And many of the imams are staunchly against terrorism, against the Taliban. And they have, 3 of them have died because they've taken very strong positions. So this is why we do these position papers, to enable women to do their own activism at the ground level. And, we always embed 3 core values of our faith, which is pluralism. This is embedded in Islamic theology, equality, and justice. And we also use the power of faith, because majority of Muslims are not going to dispense with their faith. And if you can use the power of faith, the values of faith, the deeply held values, to combat deep-seated social ills, it not only helps us to promote an egalitarian Islam, but it's also a rallying cry for promoting human rights and religious pluralism, because these values are embedded in our faith. So, just kind of like fast forwarding a little bit to the issue that we are confronted with today, I don't see this separate from what we witnessed after 9/11. To me, there's a global rise of violent extremism everywhere. I don't even have to tell you, just go to any country and you see any country struggling with, this huge problem that is plaguing everyone. It's almost like extremism is trending, and it seems to be like a trend. Everybody wants to follow it, and people are borrowing from one another the strategies that others are using. So whether you have ISIS and Al Qaeda and all the Boko Harams and all these other groups that have plagued the Muslim community for years and years, for decades almost, and it actually affects especially women who serve as the bedrock of their families and communities. And it shapes lives of future generations. And this is why we have seen so many people impacted by this issue. And everything from people fleeing and becoming refugees and becoming homeless, and entire generations get impacted by this. And because women are the glue that hold the family together, the community together, the society together, when men are gone, they're killed, or they're at war, women have to bear the brunt of this. So, and especially the other impact that it had, especially on Muslims, was what we Muslims consider our faith to be peace. Salam means peace. Islam is a root word from the word salam. I mean, it's a peaceful religion for, majority of Muslims who practice it. Yet it continues to be linked to terrorism, and with far-reaching consequences, as you've seen in the United States. Islamophobia has gone through the roof. There's this negative perception, or this continued perception, that somehow Islam is linked to terrorism, because that's all that people see. They see the terrorist activities, but they don't see the peaceful Muslims. And it not only threatens our national unity here in America, but also our shared civic life, and has caused massive reputation damage to Islam, which is hard for us to repair, because everywhere I go and I speak at forums, people always have the same perennial question, because that image that they have seen on television, or the thing that they've seen, always is the first thing that they think about. Explain to me why Islam is so violent. And then today, the world is captivated with a similar phenomena, the debate about racism and white supremacy taking center stage. And this deeply polarized narrative is affecting our public discourse, and leaving majority of individuals without the tools to stop this polarization. Nobody knows what to do. There's a lot of talk about what should be done, but really people don't even know where to begin. It's to me, it feels very much like 9/11. Post 9/11, Muslims were still stunned by what was happening around them. Many of us didn't know what to do except condemn. So there was condemnation after condemnation, statement after statement, because we didn't know how to confront this, because we didn't even know what the enemy was. And similarly here, I see similar trends in the United States right now. Majority of people don't know how to think about this issue. They know it's something bad. They know it's something that we need to do something about, but they don't really know where to even begin. And it is a result of longstanding structures which have sustained it. But I think there's a dire need to do something which is better, which means to read, to learn, to listen. Similarly, same thing that we did after 9/11, listen, sit across the table, so that we can change this issue of racism and white supremacy, and redirect it. So it requires, it requires innovative solutions. And so from our own experience, after spending a decade on working on trying to solve the issue of terrorism that was being promoted by people like ISIS and Al Qaeda, the solution for me was I had to figure out a way to bring all the information together, all the parts and the pieces that were strewn everywhere, and put it together in some sort of a format that could be used by the community, something practical, a tool, a book, an educational, a publication. So for years, we began to do research on what ISIS was, because ISIS was the latest iteration, and they were the most dangerous, because they, like the white supremacists, were basically recruiting vulnerable individuals. They were, grabbing anybody who had any issues, and they were global. They were a global network of people that were inviting people to a new vision. So people who joined them thought they were somehow joining kind of a remaking of a new Islam, or starting from, something. They thought they were part of some noble cause, and they got sucked into it. And many of them are now stranded in camps with no future. And many women joined them. So when I saw women joining them, I got very concerned, and I knew I had to step up and do something about it. So that resulted in, I will just show you this, and I think it was mentioned, Wise Up, Knowledge Ends Extremism. It's literally 365 page book, and it mostly shows you, the most important thing that it shows you is why people join. So, and it kind of gives you a nuanced understanding of why people join and for what are the reasons, and and so it makes things a little bit more complex. And in the past, when people were profiled, they were profiled based on if they have a long beard, if they go to a shisha club, or if they attend a mosque. So they're kind of like on the path to radicalization. That's just not true. Many people go to the mosque, many go to shisha bars, many people have long beards, and they have nothing to do with this. So it actually shows you specifically what is the human discontent, why are people discontented, and what was the siren song on the other side? What was the invitation? And how were these groups able to tell you that they were going to solve your problem, whatever your specific problem was? So for instance, if you were socially isolated, they gave you a sense of belonging. If you felt that as a woman you lacked agency, well, people think you're oppressed, well, they told you that, you can express your autonomy because you'll be a soldier with us. And, if you felt that the Muslim Ummah or the Muslim community was being dishonored because you thought that people didn't have respect for your religion, this was your way to restore justice. And if you thought your society was morally corrupt, you could live a pure life. So they had an answer for you. And so this is the research that we did to show people that how complex it is, because there are many things that motivate people, many drivers that drive people into the arms of these people. And how can we as communities stop it? I don't know how much more time I have, but I could go on and on, as you know. So can somebody just give me a little time check?
Yes, I think it would be great to listen to you for, let's say, another 10 minutes, and then we can start with the questions. One of the things that came to my mind, and maybe you could elaborate on this, is when you were looking at all the different motivating factors that get people into those radicalized groups, how did you get the information? Were you able to interview the community members? How did you collect all these different scenarios that obviously make a ton of sense, as you say that loud?
Yeah. So that was the hardest part. And this is something that I really want people to understand. So for many years, people used to say, well, why aren't Muslims doing something about it? What are Muslims doing? So Muslims were actually trying to confront this issue. But the issue was everything was online. These groups were online. So as a Muslim, if you went and you did a search online, you would be actually watched by the FBI. Your IP address would be tracked. So you would basically now be on a watch list of some government agencies that is trying to see why you're going to these websites. Why are you joining these people? What are you doing over there? So that prevented a lot of people from doing the kind of research that they needed to do. The deep, dark web research, going into their websites, digging through their magazines, seeing what they're saying, how they're doing through the social media. That was all very, very difficult to do. So what happened was I actually was part of an advisory group at the NYPD, a Muslim advisory group. And I suggested that, we Muslims had to do our own research to find out how, because everything was online, as you know, that how can we confront this issue and prevent people from joining these groups? So in other words, this was not being done where people were going into communities and, into mosques. It was all online, So So we started going to the websites and we basically announced that we were doing this research. And as a nonprofit, you know, if we were doing the research and our IP address was being checked, who cares? We're a nonprofit. You know, we're not individuals. We're an organization that's trying to do something community based. So they knew we were doing the research. So even if our name came up, they knew that an organization, like much like a think tank would do. So that gave us the freedom to really explore. Sometimes we would go on certain sites and it would have this like stop sign, you know, with a big X in it saying you are entering a site that is being monitored. So that allowed us the freedom to actually go in and check everything out. So for instance, if you look at this page, I'm sorry, I don't have actual images of this, but this is like their social media. It is so cool in the sense that if you're a young person and you know, they have images of kittens. So, you know, if you are a woman, you love kittens. They have images of like, you know, cubs so that to invite younger people. They have images of like muscular men exercising so that it's really appeals to the manhood of a man. They have images of like scales of justice. So if you're trying to hold up justice, you know, and they have images of women running, actually, like, you know, an empowered woman. They have images of healthcare. So if you are like a doctor and you want to help a Muslim who's like, you know, if you're a healer, it appeals to you. It was appealing to everybody at all levels. And these were memes, these were images. So we took their quotes. So we were able to get all this information together. And the one thing that we did, which was very important for our community, was to discover this, which was the yellow is what Muslims or Islamic theology and every Muslim believes. This is what the belief is. And this is what we consider to be the ISIS distorted, propagandized version. They are night and day. It's the same thing, same word, ummah, jihad, whatever words that they were using. If you read this, it's completely different than this. So majority of Muslims now know how this is being, how they were weaponizing religion. So this is the weaponization of religion. And by the way, this is similar to what's happening with white supremacy as well, because they're following the same format. You know, they're using the weaponization of Christianity. They're using certain images. They're kind of twisting it, turning it around, and justifying it. And so the answer to your question is we took the freedom that we had as a nonprofit to do this for the sake of the community because we knew individuals couldn't do it. So we published a book at the end of it with all the research that we culled together, but we did it with 72 scholars. So I invited different scholars to write different articles because I couldn't actually write an article, a supporting article for that. So it was really a work of collaboration between 72 people.
Daisy, I'm curious with it. You used a term, and I'd like to pull it back in your introduction with it. Just a question: has the media distorted the definition of the word jihad?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you know, the word jihad actually, I guess, has been co-opted by even the extremists themselves. You know, they have defined it for the rest of the Muslim community. I mean, I don't remember ever since, you know, I was a child that jihad being defined this way. Jihad is just something that you do, is a struggle. And it's a struggle against yourself. It's a struggle against your own vices. It's a struggle for self-improvement, for excellence. And, you know, you do jihad in all kinds of ways. You then, and you know, and there are many levels of jihad. So what the media did was they, you know, somehow took this notion of the holy war, which is a Christian notion, and applied it to Islam. So in Islam, there is no holy war. War is either justified or not justified. There's nothing holy about it. You know, if it's justified, if you're fighting a real enemy, it's justified. If you're fighting the defenseless, it's not justified. And that's why majority of Muslims said none of these terrorist attacks are justified because they're going after non-combatants. That's not a war. That's an act of aggression. So, you know, so jihad the greatest and the highest form of jihad is self-purification, or striving to fight against your hero, which I think our ex-president could certainly have used. Jihad al-ilm is the pursuit of academic and juristic efforts. So a lot of people who establish universities, that's like a jihad to get the best of education. And Jihad al-amal is to strive and improve society through political, cultural, and education reform. Jihad al-mal is to work through altruism, to distribute your wealth, which is a lot of Muslims do this during Ramadan, and they get very charitable. And then Jihad al-qital is the first and the final resort, which is to fight back in self-defense. That kind of jihad is allowed against aggression or injustice, but and preemptive attacks and aggressions are forbidden. So this is why it frustrated us for so long, because the media was just using the term and applying the terrorist definition of it, and the rest of us were saying that's not what it is, please correct it. But it never got corrected, and then it got reinforced in the minds of people. So media has a very big role to play, and one of the things we'd like to since we have so much experience with this, is make sure that they don't do this with the white supremacist groups as well, because media tends not to, they're not into nuance, and they don't, the kind of reporting that they do is not nuanced. It's very much surface. And I see the kind of reporting they're doing on white supremacy. You see a bunch of people protesting, you see anger, you see this, but you don't really have a nuance of what's really going on, the level that it needs to get to. But maybe that's just the way the media operates.
Thank you. So with that then, looking at the content within the book, how do you get that message, that content, into marginalized communities, to those who are living in conditions where maybe they don't have access to the book, but as you say, the corruption of theology, the distortion of theology, and if they're not having access to that information to see the truth versus the fake or the false?
Yeah. So this is where the grassroots community activism really comes in handy. So when we launched the book, we also were not sure how it was going to get distributed, because first of all, it's a big fat book. It's huge, but it has everything in it, and it's tailored for different people. And it has different things in it. So if you're trying to rehabilitate someone, it has a section on how to rehabilitate someone. How do you talk to people? How do you engage them? So that you can build trust and have empathy. If you are somebody who is struggling to make sure that your kid is not on the path of recruitment, there's a section on 16 steps of recruitment on how recruitment actually works, how brainwashing works. And so if your kid is saying something, you're like, oh my God, I think my kid is brainwashed. So that's why we needed to get into communities. So we first started with a national tour. So we started going into communities, and we got a lot of mosques signed up for the book. And so we sent emails to mosques and sent them information about the book, and they became kind of partners at the local level within the communities, and they started ordering the book for their own constituents. They distributed it. They did their own. The imams read it, so they were aware. A lot of times, if somebody is being recruited or is somehow joining a person, the first person that notices that is a family member. It's either a sibling or a mother, or a close friend. And oftentimes they don't know what to do about the issue, right? What do you do? What do you say? Because the person has been brainwashed. So they usually will go to somebody who's more influential. And if the person is saying something that has some sort of a religious element to it, like they're saying, well, I have to go fight jihad, or I have to do this, or something that they've heard, or have to migrate and do hijrah, then they'll go to the imam. They'll say, Imam, I think my son doesn't know what he's doing. And if the imam is not equipped, and if he's not a counselor, and if he doesn't know how these groups operate, he's not going to be effective. So this is why the imams were very supportive of this book when we reached out to them. And many of them really appreciated the fact that they could see in black and yellow the difference, and they could understand where the person was at and start with where that person was at and re-educate them. So part of re-educating people requires the knowledge of what it is that you are trying to unlearn in the mind of that person. So it had to get down to that level at the grassroots level. And then with interfaith communities, it was very helpful because we have a lot of allies. As I mentioned earlier, we have so many people that are very trusted friends who are frustrated because they didn't have the information at their fingertips when they were being confronted by somebody within their own community about Muslims, or they saw something, or an Islamophobic member who said something about Muslims, but the rabbis and the pastors would not know what to do. So when they received the book, they're like, okay, finally, somebody clarified it for me. Now I know there's all these frequently asked questions. There are all the terms in there. And it was, it was very helpful to people to now have this manual at hand anytime they needed it, because it's got longevity. It's not something that's going to go get outdated. The outdated part is the ISIS part, but the part about the theological, descriptions, that's all there. It's eternally there.
But Daisy, with that, because we always know in this work, the first step is awareness. We have to become aware of what is happening. So then the next step is education. Can we become educated on the issue and how to confront? For the sake of our audience, what becomes the next thing as a line of defense? Family, friends, teachers, what becomes the next step? I'm aware, I've got a little bit of background of education, but now I begin to notice. Now what do I do?
Yeah. So you mean within the family itself, right? So
in the family or in the school or in the community at large.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, they're just, if you look at any other issue, whether it's Alcoholics Anonymous or any other issues that are recognized issues in society, there are a lot of places you can go get help. You have an 800 number, Suicide Watch, and the research that we did for the book, we actually listed all those things at the end. For instance, if a parent, had a drug issue, they would go to an imam instead of going to drug prevention. They are like, they're new immigrants, maybe they're embarrassed, they don't know what to do. So they'll go to something else and not realizing that there are national resources for this. So the problem is nobody has recognized this issue of extremism as a social issue where people have actually created, rapid response mechanisms. There are no rapid response mechanisms. In our book, we have two mothers that talk about how they lost two of their sons. Literally saw their sons like they were like trying to hold on to their sons and they couldn't, because there was no mechanism, there was no one to call, and they knew that their kids were about to go to Syria or had fallen into the trap, and these were innocent kids. One was a kind of a convert, a young kid who was a convert, and these mothers write these heart-wrenching stories about how they had no one to turn to. So this is still a gap. And this is going to be a big gap with the white supremacy right now. I can guarantee you that. Now I'm writing it in blood because people don't know how to deal with this issue. And there are only a fraction, literally, like on my fingertips, I can count, there might be like 6 or 7 organizations nationally that deal with exiting white supremacists, but not early intervention. So there are people who have joined white supremacist groups and then they leave, and then these people help them rehabilitate themselves, and those are then become reformed people. But there is nothing still available for early intervention. So if you're a mother and you are noticing, which many people are noticing within their families, that somebody has drunk from that Kool-Aid over there, and because they're saying all these things, whether it's fake news or the election was stolen, or everybody is, the Jews, the Muslims, the immigrants, the blacks are stealing everything from us, because these are the 4 groups that they hate. And so therefore we have to restore, we have to take back this country because it's been stolen away from us. This is the kind of stuff that people will say because this is what they've heard. This is what they have consumed on whatever forums and platforms they are. And there is no line of defense for that particular family member to fight that. So what needs to happen is we need to do a mass education. I'm hoping that once our book comes out, because it's designed for communities, it's not just an academic book, it's designed for communities, that we can do at least, we have series of webinars that we will be creating for community leaders. So at least the community leaders have the resource, then the community leaders then will be responsible for drilling it down into their local communities. And then their local communities they maybe do it something within their churches and their synagogues and their, places of worship and community centers. It's going to take some time. It's not something that can be done by one organization. It has to be done in coalitions, and all the people that care about this issue have to step forward, whether they are faith-based people or they are NGOs or they are think tanks. We have to do this together. That's the only way we can create a leveraging effect and expand our reach. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to get into those pockets.
And I so appreciated as you began this morning, it took me into, so the Idaho Anne Frank Human Rights Memorial is filled with quotes etched into the stone. And one of them, as you were talking, it just seemed to speak to this, by Eleanor Roosevelt. We have to face the fact that either all of us are going to die together or we are going to learn to live together. And if we are to live together, we have to talk.
We have to talk. Absolutely. And we have to understand, in order for you to even solve the issue, we have to understand this is like a disease. It's like, it's like a mental disease, because people have, by the time you go from fear to anxiety, worry to anxiety to, there are all these steps of how people get to this level. Then you have anger, then that turns into hate, and that hate then turns into suffering. This is what's happening. But what is the root of it? In the fear itself has to be dealt with. It's like a domino. You got to pull that fear domino out for the whole domino to fall. And then it comes crashing down. So if you don't know what is at the base of it, it's fear. It's fear of the other. It's fear of the unknown. It's fear of I'm losing everything. And that fear has been instilled. It's not something that it's not so irrational. It's actually been fed. So we have to work on it, and we have to work on the fear part of it. So part of what our book will try to do is to show that this fear is irrational. It's not really rational fear, because no one's taking anything away. These are just talking points.
Excellent. A reminder to our audience, if you have a question, to please direct message to either Esther Kudus or myself, Dan Prinzing. Esther, I believe, has received a few questions, so we'll turn to her chat.
Okay. Hang on a second. Sorry. So one question that we wanted to ask you is, roughly how big is the Muslim community in the United States?
So, because the census doesn't ask you about your religion, so there are estimates. The lowest estimate is 3 to 4 million. And on the high end, it could be anywhere from 8 million.
Okay. All right. And, from the data that you are familiar with, how many people have been radicalized, say, in the last 20 years within that community?
Oh, within the US community?
Yeah, the US Muslim community.
Very, very marginal. I mean, you can literally count the number of people.
Sure.
It might be less than 100.
So,
but it's too many because it's not only the number of people, it's how much each person's, what happens to that person. So the incarceration rate of somebody being radicalized and giving some sort of support to ISIS, support in the sense that, oh, you were online and you were consuming the stuff, is very high. The incarceration rate could be 30 to 60 years, as opposed to white supremacists who are doing the same exact thing. They're not even getting incarcerated, leave alone. They might even get pardoned, who knows, So it has a huge toll, because not only does it affect that person, but it affects the entire family, because now nobody wants to be affiliated with that family. So literally people, and I've spoken to people whose family members were caught or were on their way to Syria, and they were shunned by the whole community, shunned simply because it's self-preservation. So people will, brother will say to a sister, take my phone number off your phone because I don't want to be tracked by FBI,
Mm-hmm.
And then if you are known as, a family who had a potential terrorist in the family, that family, nobody's going to marry into that family.
Mm-hmm.
It's those kinds of, so it not only affects that one person, it affects the entire community.
Sure.
Because now the suspicion has been cast on the entire family and the entire community.
Yeah.
So do you think, are we seeing a little bit of this post January 6th? Now all of a sudden, those who have expressed or distorted Christianity are now feeling the same eyes upon them if they were involved in January 6th.
Of course. It's like if you're part of January 6th, you're part of 9/11, or you're like somehow linked to that because you have links to something that was so, it's like one of these moments, that horrific moment that takes place in our hearts and minds because we're all transfixed, right? Everybody was transfixed, like 9/11, everybody was transfixed. Yeah, 3,000 people died and less people died, but something bigger happened. There was an attack on our Constitution, attack on the very institution that we so value, that it was an affront to everybody. So being affiliated with that is already going to impact not only that family, that community, and they're going to get incarcerated, and who knows what's going to come with that, because FBI is using the same exact tactics that they were using with ISIS and Al-Qaeda, because now they're doing this. Anybody who's affiliated with anybody now is a suspect. So they only have one strategy. They're not that smart. They're not like so innovative that they're going to change their strategy. They have that same strategy that they use with ISIS. They're just now applying it to white supremacy.
So to what extent does the Muslim community have a strong relationship with the various law enforcement agencies? We know that, this country is currently reckoning with the very challenging situation that's happening between the African American community and its police relations, and that somehow, not having strong relations, not historically has also contributed to deepening of the problem. So is the Muslim community currently having a strong, if you're a Muslim mother and say you are concerned that your son or daughter is in the early stages of being radicalized and some kind of recruitment efforts have begun, would you feel comfortable taking that to the law enforcement agencies? Are the relationships there?
Yeah, well, so it's varied. It's different for communities. So Muslim community is very diverse.
Mm-hmm.
40% of the Muslim community is African American. So they would never pick up the phone because they have experience with FBI from the past, with Malcolm X, and so their history is very much the history of African Americans in general, where there is not that much trust between law enforcement and the Black communities. So immigrant communities tend to trust authority because they come from countries where they trust their authorities. They are told to trust their authorities. So some immigrant communities will be the first ones to pick up the phone and say, I have somebody here who's like a real danger to my community, pick him up, And so, and because they don't want that one person to impact the rest of the community. So they will be the first ones to call. And it has happened a number of times, many tips, many people who have called in. Like I think there was a Times Square event about to happen, and a local Muslim Senegalese vendor called the police. So people there are like good citizens. They just want to report a crime, or a crime is about to happen. They don't want it to happen. But I'll give you one incident, which is kind of heart-wrenching. And a very successful businessman, his son, began to explore his spirituality. I guess there was not a real mechanism in the family to do anything because they were fairly secular. secular Arabs, and the kid just went on his own search because they didn't have a community, they didn't belong to a mosque, and like I said, they were very secular. But ultimately, the kid was very much into social justice. He began reading stuff about what was happening in Syria, and got this anger, like, why isn't anybody doing anything about Syria? And ultimately, he decided he was going to help the Syrian refugees and go to Syria. So his father noticed that there had been changes in his kid, and saw his laptop and saw that his son was doing something. So he picked up the phone and called the local FBI and said, I think my son is consuming some stuff from ISIS or whoever. And the FBI said, well, he hasn't committed a crime, so there's nothing we can do. And so a year went by, and the father gets a call from the FBI saying, your son was on his way to the airport. We've picked him up. Please come to the police station or whatever. And he went there, and they caught him for material support, meaning on his way, intending to join ISIS. And the kid said, no, I'm just going to Syria. That kid is in solitary confinement for probably 50, 60 years right now.
Wow.
It's a very sad story. And the father says, I wish I had never called them. I wish I had never called them because I destroyed my son's life.
Okay, so Daisy, let me ask in this within, and this is coming through the chat in the question. We're hearing talk from folks who they're going to say, I'm not a bad person. I'm not a violent person. But you begin to hear the rhetoric. How do we begin to disrupt the thinking before? We know in our own work, we have designed the spiral of injustice, and we know that words matter. Mm-hmm. And so when you begin to hear, we know that devolution of injustice, it can go then to avoidance and discrimination and violence. So they're going to tell you, I'm not a bad person. I'm God-fearing. I'm a good person. But when you begin to hear the rhetoric, how do you begin to disrupt it?
Yeah, so, we went through this whole thing in the book of how to actually speak to people. And so the way to do this is, and I did this actually with a young woman who was actually in jail, was incarcerated because she tried to give material support. So you really can't start with trying to argue the points. You have to start with where they're at. And you have to ask them, well, how did you arrive at that conclusion? So you have to poke holes into their theories. And you have to do it in such a way as if you're curious, you're trying to understand. And you have to really listen to cues and things that they're saying, because ultimately it's going to boil down to something personal in their own lives that led them to go to this direction. So I was invited when the book came out to speak to a young girl in a detention center. And she was potentially going to be incarcerated for 60 years. That was the charge. She was a recruit of ISIS. And by the way, this is no different than the white supremacists recruiting one another. So that was the charge. But because it was a foreign terrorist organization, the incarceration rate is huge, like 60 years. And so I was brought in to see whether I could speak to her and see if I might be able to rehabilitate her in the detention center. So I took the steps of how to speak to a person. Normally I would have gone, probably argued with her, said, well, you're wrong. I just said, tell me where you were born, tell me everything about your childhood, the good, bad, and the ugly, and then tell me how you landed here. And I'm all ears, and let's spend an hour. And basically, she just went through the whole hour. She told me everything about her life, the traumas, the family disaffliction, the sexual abuse, blah, blah, blah. She went through the whole thing. And at the end, I realized that the reason why she was joining them was an escape from her life here, like to get a brand new life, to get a brand new husband, to get a family, because that was what was missing in her life. So a lot of times you'll discover that as you speak to these people, as if you're a counselor, as if you're trying to understand their affliction, that is going to boil down to a few things. And if you can unravel that part, as I did with this young girl, her sentence was reduced to 18 months and now she's out. And now she's an active member of society. And she wants nothing to do with any of this. She's realized that her life was nearly destroyed. But I am acting as a lifeline, which is what's desperately needed for a lot of people because they don't have friends, they don't have allies. So what happens is when people don't have a family network, a strong family network, or friends or somebody they can talk to, they then go hop off and join another group where they feel that brotherhood and sisterhood and that sense of belonging. And because people want to belong, and then when the belonging is couched in terms of a higher cause, then they're really going to belong because everybody wants to be a hero, everybody wants to change the world. And so this is it's tedious work, but if there are enough foot soldiers in the country that are willing to be you know friends, or like I want to speak to you, tell me about your ailment, I think that people really need community. People need a sense of belonging and they don't have it, and they just go to and join these groups.
Daisy, I'm just so grateful for our conversation this morning with it. There's just so many pieces in here I'd love to just continue to unpack, but for sake of our time and for our audience, your work has just been fascinating, and your involvement in the community. If you could, in our conclusion, what are the lessons learned? I mean, what are the universal lessons you've taken away from this experience, these conversations, the interaction? What are the lessons that we could all take away from this morning?
Well, so my personal lesson is, because I didn't come from this line of work, that, never underestimate what you're capable of doing. If you can put your heart and mind to it, you can actually do something. You can create some sort of a change. You can do one little thing and actually have an impact on one life or two lives. So don't ever think that this is too big for me. This is for other people to do. This is not my line of work. All of us can do something. I mean, I never imagined that I would be doing this kind of work, but I knew that there was a dire need in my community for my skills and my talent. And the rest I had to learn on the job. I am learning so much about white supremacy right now and race relations, because when you saw those people in the Capitol running around with the guy with the horns, the shaman, I knew exactly who he was, not personally, but I knew who his character was and what he represented and which group he belonged to, because I had gotten this education from this book that we're writing. And so what I'm saying is that you will discover, it's like almost like if you are curious and you come from a curious place, which is where we should always be operating out of that curiosity. Why do people do what they do? I think that the fear will go away and it'll enable us to do things much more effectively.
Thank you so much. On behalf of our three organizations in Philadelphia, Milwaukee, and Boise, we're so grateful for your time, for your wisdom, and for sharing with us this morning. As we're all confronting, when we see it around us, when we hear it around us, now the question is, what are we going to do? Thank you for helping to pave that way in that discussion.
Thank you. And look out for our Wise Up White Supremacy publication coming out in a few months. It'd be great if everybody can join the movement, within their own capacity, and, spread the webinars out there and be your own ambassador and create webinars. That's what we need. We need more people, doing the outreach, which we cannot reach everybody. So I really
then I'm going to put out the teaser that I hope when the book comes out, we can have another conversation.
That would be
absolutely.
Great. Absolutely. Great.
Thank you so much. And to our audience today, we hope you've enjoyed the programming this week. We hope we have prompted both thought. Now let's begin to prompt action.
Action.
My best to all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.